Peters Cartridge factory, located in Kings Mills, Ohio, was built in 1916. However, there were buildings on property dating back to before 1855. The primary purpose of the factory was to produce ammunition for the growing Miami Powder Company, later known as the Peters Cartridge Company. Explosions were common throughout the factory's lifetime, including one in 1890 that killed 12 workers and started several fires. These explosions contributed to the toxic metals that are found within the area's soils. The factory produced ammunition for both World War I and World War II, exporting cartridges to many countries, including the Russian Empire, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, and Ireland. Since the Second World War, the factory has gone through an extended list of ownership, including Remington Arms, Columbia Records, Seagram Distillers, Luxottica, and the DuPont Company. The soil surrounding the factory was deemed contaminated and was listed by the EPA as a Superfund site in 1987. The primary objective of the EPA was to restore the soils in the area to a level deemed safe and ready for residential development. But concerns surrounding the metal contaminants in the soil was that the metals could leach into the Little Miami River, which is located about 100 feet from the factory and serves as a place of public recreation. Local plants were established to help prevent the soil from eroding. Once the site was deemed safe, the public wanted to preserve the historic building by using it to give back to the community. A developer purchased the factory to repurpose it into a modern apartment complex and a restaurant.
The primary problem of the site was determining who was culpable for restoring the land. The Peters Cartridge factory contributed lead from ammunition pellets. LensCrafter was responsible for Freon 113 entering the soil, but both of those companies moved out of the site a long time ago. The DuPont Company ended up having to pay for the restoration because they owned the building when the high levels of pollutants were discovered. DuPont did sue LensCrafters for being a responsible party member, and LensCrafters did pay some money for the restoration. Originally, the soil conditions were going to be brought up to industrial zoning standards, but the purchasers of the Peters Cartridge factory wanted to turn the plot into a residential area. This meant that the soil restoration had to be improved to a higher quality to be safe for residents. While the community supported the restoration of the site, occasionally the Loveland Bike Trail that runs through the Peters Cartridge factory had to be closed down. This led to the challenge of working on the site at specific times in order not to bother the public. One more minor challenge was the vandalism and breaking and entering. When the factory was originally abandoned, it became a place for juvenile delinquency. Litter, graffiti, broken glass, and other abandoned items can be found throughout the site.
Soil in areas that exceed the EPA standard for lead will be removed to a depth of 2 feet BGS and replaced with new soil. This excludes around large trees. The area will be temporarily stabilized, then vegetation will be planted similar to that naturally found there. Culvert outfalls will be excavated and replaced with sediment and riprap as well as vegetation. The soil removed from the site will be placed on the site in one consolidation cell, meant to prevent the lead from leaking into the ground or escaping the site.
Damari Collier was the remedial project manager of the site. She gave us insight on how the design process worked.
So during the design phase, we were collecting a lot more additional samples to really delineate, where the extents of these contaminated areas were. And we found levels of lead that were really high that they hadn't found in the initial investigation. And so these really high lead levels actually turned out to be hazardous. And so when you have hazardous levels of a material, you can't just put it in the same kind of unit that you would put non-hazardous materials. So what we ended up doing is we treated any of the soils that were hazardous and we basically made them non-hazardous so that they could go in this containment cell and we didn't have to ship them off site. So during that treatment process, they would take the soil that they knew was hazardous, they would treat it, and it was a treatment combination mix of like different kinds of lime and cement mixtures, make it more inert, and then test it again. And once it was below a certain parts per million we knew that it was going to be non-hazardous, and then we could put it in the cell. So that in that process, we had to do what's called an explanation of significant difference, because for our documentation and paperwork, because it did add like a different scope to the cleanup a bit, because we ended up having to treat some of this material. So after we did that, we took all the contaminated material, placed it in our containment cell, and appropriately capped and covered the cell. And then we had restoration of the rest of the site. So we removed sediment and bank material along the Little Miami River, and then we replanted thousands and thousands of trees back within the area. And then the former process area itself, that was carved out separately, because there is a group that bought that and wanted to redevelop it for, for recreational and residential use. So as you guys probably are aware from reading back through everything, they actually, that former process area was only recommended because how it was zoned when we were working on it to be cleaned up to industrial levels. But the redeveloper purchased it and worked with the state of Ohio and their voluntary action program to actually clean up beyond industrial levels for lead and other metals to residential levels, so that they could actually use that for residential living, which is where they have kind of the real cool condominiums and stuff now. And they also have a brewery on site, which worked with us and through the state of Ohio to clean that up even further, and to kind of get this this one portion of the former process area actually delisted from our national priorities list. So it's actually no longer part of the Superfund program. It actually is off our national priorities list. And so that is kind of the end blessing of a Superfund site, is when you get delisted like that and you're deleted from the national priorities list, it's no longer, it's met all of its goals, and it's met all of its cleanup levels, and can be used for whatever the institutional controls call for at that point, which is residential, which is as low as you can go. So that's kind of cool, and the fact that that former process area it was kind of carved out, and so now we're working on the rest of it to get everything in place, and hopefully delist more of the property